Welcome to Emmanuel Christian Seminary in the Thompson Center as we begin our 2011-2012 academic year, and that also begins our Emmanuel Institutes year. So you're here for the first seminar of this season. Very pleased that we're continuing on with a series of presentations that began more than 2 years ago on the theme of the multiple roles of the preacher. And tonight is part 6 in that 7-part series entitled The Preacher as Vision Caster. Our presenter tonight is Glen Schneiders. Glen is the founding pastor of the Crossroads Christian Church in Lexington, Kentucky. That church will have its 25th anniversary next November. I had the pleasure of being a colleague of Glen's in the very beginning of that particular church. Even had the pleasure of attending service once at the Shoney's restaurant where that church began so many years ago. Glen has had 2 pastorates in his ministerial career, at the Crossroads Church, of course, and also at the Rising Sun, Indiana congregation, where he began as a student minister when he was a student at Cincinnati Bible College and seminary, where he completed his ministerial academic work. Glen and I have been partners in the church planting world of the Stone Campbell movement for many, many years. Glen is not only an accomplished church planter in his own right, but one of the finest church planting coaches that I've ever known. And certainly if I ever was asked to recommend a coach, Glen would be my very first choice. He's someone who understands the minister's heart and understands the gospel's call. And I think tonight, as he shares from his own experience there at the Crossroads Christian Church in Lexington, how he has endeavored to be God's instrument as a vision caster, you'll capture that. Throughout the presentation tonight, there's going to be several brief video vignettes that will be shared to illustrate things that Glen is talking about. And as always, we will conclude tonight at 9 p.m. So in just a moment, I'll have Glen come and we'll welcome him. But let's go to the Lord together and ask His blessing on our time here this evening. Heavenly Father, we thank you tonight for the men and women here at Emmanuel Christian Seminary that many years ago had a vision for this thing that we refer to as the Emmanuel Institutes. Thank you for their casting of that vision and for the opportunity that all of us have month after month to live that vision out in sessions such as this one, and a unique one on the vision casting work of the preacher. I pray your blessing upon Glen Schneiders as he comes to share his heart and from a wealth of experience. Give us teachable minds and receptive minds as we listen carefully to what he has to say in dialogue with him. And Father, I praise you for this entire series on the preacher. We value that very special role and function. And for those that are here tonight in that role as a preacher, I personally ask a full and rich anointing upon each of them for their work. And for all of us who have a preacher that we can call friend and pastor, show us how we can lift those individuals up to be even more effective in your kingdom. For this evening, we praise you and we honor you through Jesus Christ. Amen. Everyone, welcome Glen Schneiders.
Well, it's great being able to be here with you. The last time I was here, I got a chance to see the idea of this building and the idea of the Institute coming together. And so it's fun to be able to participate in that, and just honored to be able to try and give you a little bit of insight from me. Certainly don't consider myself an expert in any way, shape, or form in regard to this. But what I wanted to do, and I thought it would just be helpful, is I want to just let you see this subject, the preacher as a vision caster, lived out in the last 24 years at not Rising Sun. I saw Steve Trinkle over here. Rising Sun is where I used to be, but at Crossroads Christian in Lexington, Kentucky. Because I think that the important thing for me is to be a practitioner. You know, it's not to talk in theory, but rather to just let you see that played out in 24 years and try to give you a chance to play that out in your situation or maybe a future situation that may be a part of yours. You know, a number of years ago, I had my friend on staff call me and said, "I've got a deal for you." He said, a friend of ours, David, is graduating from medical school in LASIK surgery, and next week he'll be a doctor. But this week, this week, we can get LASIK surgery for half price from him. And then next week he's also moving to Wyoming. And so 3 of us, I'm still shocked at this, but 3 of us, you know, for half price went and got our eyes slit open. And my wife to this day says, you know, I cannot believe that you would do that. I'm a pretty calculating guy in a lot of ways, but the money thing just drove me on this. And I've been, you know, nearsighted all my life. You know, get up in the night, I can't read the clock or whatever. Playing sports, having to have glasses, going to the beach, and not being able to see which direction the ocean was. So the idea of being able to see clearly was just exciting to me. And I remember one of our staff wives was the first one. She had it done. She came out and she had her husband helping her along, and she's pretending like she can't see. Okay, so I have it done, and I can't open my eyes. It is hurting me like crazy. I'm coming out pretending I can see because I don't want to let on that I'm struggling. We get out in the lobby of this area, a rather large area, and my wife's taking off the car, and I said, "Marilyn, come get me. I cannot. The light is just bothering my eyes." And I went home, and she fixed me chicken noodle soup, and the noodles kept falling off my spoon. I couldn't see them, and went to bed, slept, and I woke up with 20/15 vision. And to this day, these glasses are for the reading aspect of my eyes, but I can see 20/15. And it's amazing what it's like to be able to see so clearly. And what I want us to think about is this whole idea of what's it like as church leaders when we can really see where God wants to take the church clearly. And so that's what I'm just going to try to do. I'm going to give you just examples from Crossroads and my experience there. It happened in Rising Sun as well, but I think a lot more clarity for me over these last 25 years. I will say that I'm thankful the Institute is doing this because nobody taught me this stuff in college. You know, I had one class on business administration at Cincinnati. It was a 2-hour class by a professor that's no longer around, and it was just when I look at my life and think about how important that whole leadership component is to the church, I'm just grateful that you're doing this. I think that's just an important thing. And so hopefully there'll be something of value in this that'll benefit some of you. You know, the scripture we're all familiar with in the King James in Proverbs 29, verse 18, it says this way, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." And the fact of the matter is, a clear vision is essential to a healthy church that makes significant impact in a local community. And that's not to say we can't have impact. But when we have that razor focus, when we have clarity around those issues, it just is significantly different. And I would suggest, and I'm not alone in saying this, that there's a leadership crisis within the church today, and that preachers must lead effectively through clear vision. People are looking for the church. They want the church to be the answer. And I fear that in many churches today, the vision is to show up and to do it all again. You know, it is not a clearly thought out perspective. And someone said this, and I couldn't remember where I got this, but men will never cast off their dearest pleasures for the drowsy request of someone who doesn't even seem to mean what he says. Have you ever visited a church, maybe on vacation, or you're just in a different locale, and you come in, and the guy gets up there, or the gal gets up there and is speaking, and you think, man, I don't even think they believe this. There is just no energy, there's no excitement, there's no enthusiasm. You look out in the pews or in the chairs, and you just see people that are just going through the motions. And I think a lot of that has to do with vision. And a lot of that has to do with whether this is a calling or just simply a career. This is just another job. When it's a calling, when we have this mandate from God, then we have to have this sense, what does God want me to do? And I think the danger with some of this is to think that for all of us that's the same. And in some ways it is. But when you are able to figure out how that translates through your personality and your giftedness and through your church community, when that all gets enmeshed, it gets really good. It gets exciting. Now, I was talking to somebody that was saying to me before this that they're having more fun in ministry than they've ever had. And isn't that the way it should be? Shouldn't it be that sense that it is with excitement we get a chance to do what we do? And I also realize that having done this for 24 years and another 13 in rising sun, so a total of 37 years, that it gets hard. And it gets draining. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But let me just give you a little sense of Crossroads. 24 years ago, we started Crossroads. There were actually 60 applicants that had applied for this church plant in Lexington, Kentucky. I had called a friend of mine, Roy Mays, at Southland Christian Church, and we were talking about another matter. At the time, I was a trustee at Cincinnati, at the college. I was talking to him about a matter with regard to that. And at the end of the conversation, Roy said to me, "You wouldn't be interested in starting a new church, would you?" Well, I had heard a guy speak in southern Indiana at a men's gathering about this idea of church planting being the most effective way to reach new people with the gospel. Again, for you all today, that makes perfect sense. But 24 years ago, that was kind of new news. When I graduated from seminary, if you couldn't get a church job, you started a church. It was not viewed as the finest and the best, which is exciting to me today as a coach of church planters. I think we're getting some of the brightest and some of the very best. But 24 years ago, that was not the case. That was just beginning to gain some traction. And so they actually, 60 guys applied. They had actually offered the position to one guy, but he wanted too much money. And so they were still looking. And so I called a couple guys I knew in Lexington, and I said, I'd be interested in talking to you. And they knew me a little bit, and so they said, sure, we'll let you come down and interview. So I interviewed, and I talked afterward to one of the search committee guys. He's actually the camp manager. His name was Ralph Byers. And Ralph said to me, he said, of the applicants we've talked to, you're the only one that had a vision for this church. You're the only guy that didn't come in and say, well, we just love Lexington, Kentucky. We're big UK fans, and we'd love to be here. Now, here's the thing you got to know about me. I was not a UK fan. I never had any desire to live in Kentucky. I also, one time, had said, years before that, I will never live in a river town. And I spent 13 years on the Ohio River in Rising Sun, Indiana. So I learned also that God will do with you some things that you don't think you're going to do. But again, it was interesting to me. He said, you're the first guy that really presented a vision for what you thought this new church needed to be. And I can actually remember I had to do a trial sermon, and so I got introduced, and I'm living in Indiana. We're in Kentucky. And so there's huge rivalry there, and Roy Mays introduces me, and he tells this joke about Bobby Knight. Huge laughter. So then I tell a joke about Kentucky. It's crickets in the room. There is no laughter. And right then and there, a very important point about understanding your culture. The number one religion in central Kentucky is the University of Kentucky Wildcats. And I have become a fan. You know, my girls have definitely been that. But I went to, again, there wasn't a lot, there wasn't organizations like Stadia and other great organizations to help church planners. So I called two guys that I knew that were doing good church plants in a way that was beyond a storefront. That really had a desire and a sense that it was going to be something significant. Not talking about size not being significant, but where they really had a vision for this being the start of a great church. And one of them said to me, you know, Fuller does this thing called How to Plant a Church. And as it turned out, like the next week they were offering it in Anderson, Indiana. And so I went to that How to Plant a Church seminar, and I heard a guy talk about telemarketing, of all things, as a way to reach into your community and find people that weren't going to church. The guy's name was Norman Wan. Now this was, again, when you go back to 1987, you know, there was not cell phones. At any level, there was not answering machines. There were not private numbers. And so the idea of using the phone to call people and find people that weren't going to church was to me very attractive, especially if you're trying to reach people that weren't going to church, which was what God was laying on my heart. Now again, as I say that today, that's what a lot of us do, right? But 24 years ago, just to give you perspective, I get this sense of where God is leading us. And a guy who's a youth minister at the church where I've got an office, once we get going, he hands me a document, a piece of paper. It's from the Chicago Tribune. He says, this sounds like what you're trying to do. And it was about a church called Willow Creek Community Church that was just beginning to be known. I read Joe Ellis's books, The Church on Target, The Church on Purpose, years ago. Great books to help you think about leadership. If you can find those today, I would encourage you, a great focus on a target, having a purpose to your church. But in one of those books, Rick, he mentioned a guy named Rick Warren. Again, now to you, who doesn't know Rick Warren? But at that time, who is this guy Rick Warren? And I ordered some cassettes from Saddleback, and I listened to those things, and those things began to shape and form the vision and clarify the vision in me. And we're going to talk more about how important it is that you continue to educate yourself around this. And so I go to this Fuller seminar. I get this sense of we're going to make these phone calls, and we're going to trust God. Here's the interesting thing too. I remember this very distinctly. Packing up to leave in Anderson, Indiana. And a guy that has been at this conference with me the whole time, we're just talking. I said, where are you going to plant a church? He said, Lexington, Kentucky. Really? That's where I'm going. And that church was near where we started. And it did not have a clear sense of where it was going to go, and does not exist today. And I don't say that, I say that just sadly. It's been a reminder to me of how gracious God has been to me and to our Crossroads Church to bless it the way that He has. But I sense that God could use me to create a vision that would be a church that was reaching new people. And I remember that this friend of mine that spoke in Indiana and talked about planting churches said, you know, planting a church is going out on a limb so far that if God isn't holding it up, it's going to break off. And I would suggest that that's where God wants us to be with regard to a vision for our church, whether it's a new church plant or existing church. What are we doing that if God isn't in it, it's not going to happen? I think for a lot of us, our vision is something we know we can pull off, instead of having to trust God to pull it off. You know, we chose the name Crossroads. Again, that name has become very popular. At the time, there was one other crossroads, to my knowledge, in the whole United States. But we chose that name because we were trying to reach people who were at a crossroads in their spiritual journey. And we were trying to provide new direction for searching people. And so we made 11,000 phone calls to people in a 5-mile radius of our intended location. Now again, here's how God was helping me figure out direction. In one of those phone calls, a lady named Debbie asked if she could speak to me. We are saying we want to be a church for the unchurched, a church for those who have had toxic church relationships, and a church for those who have messed up. So Debbie asked to speak to me. She said, I'm just going to be really honest with you. I've had an affair. I want to know if I'm welcome in your church. I said, well, can you give me a little more detail? And so she did. I knew the church that she had come from, and I asked if I could speak to the pastor there. She granted me permission. And what I learned is that indeed that had happened, but that couple was working on restoring their marriage. And this pastor felt it would be very good, that this was a good lady who'd made a very bad mistake, and it would be a good thing for her to come and be a part of us. Now again, God was clarifying in me and in us, are we really going to live into these things or not? And again, I think 24 years later, we're a lot farther down that road. But again, back then, that was significant stuff. And here's the interesting thing about Debbie. She ended up teaching my kids at Crossroads, meeting a wonderful man, and is happily married today. And I think that God was helping to clarify vision for me in that. And you know, God has honored that vision. We had an offer from two churches in Lexington. Lexington has some larger churches, and so we had one large church that offered us 100 people, and another offered us 50. And I said, you know, I don't want those people. And here's why. They're going to come with certain expectations. I want people that are drawn to our vision. I don't want someone expecting me to be this preacher or that preacher. I want them to be captured by our vision and wanting to be a part of it. And I think for any of us, whether our church has been around for a long time or for a very short period of time, people need to buy into your vision. And out of that, decide whether this is the right place for them or not. And we wanted everyone coming in to be on the inside rather than outsiders. If 100 people knew each other, and then these people we phone call and come in, what's going to happen? The new people are on the outside, and the people that know each other are talking to themselves and talking to each other instead of engaging. So what we did is we created an environment where everybody was new. Now there was a launch team, but those 50 people we gathered from various places. A lot of them new to Lexington, and they came all excited about this vision of reaching people. And you know, I want to mention this statement by Warren Bennis because he says, leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. What I'm trying to do is help to illustrate that to you. You know, we can have something great on paper, but we've got to be able to live it out. And God was helping that to become reality in my mind. And so our first service was in Shoney's Inn, and we had 125 unchurched people from the phone calls we had made, and another 50 in our launch team. And we had two services in the meeting room that first day because we were not a small church, we were a big church getting started. That was our philosophy. And I believe, people have asked me this, I believe that God would grow this church to beyond 1,000. I didn't know what that would be, but I just really had that sense that that's what God was wanting to do, and He's been more than faithful to that. What I want to do is I want to show you the first service that we did at Shoney's Inn. And this will give you a chance to I want you to hear what is said about vision and just apologize for some of the other aspects. So let's just watch the screens. I got some people here that got a phone call and they've decided they're at church today, and that is exciting. And you don't know me from Adam. If you got a picture in the paper, it looked like I had a little more hair than I do. That wasn't my fault, that's just the way it came out. I'm not trying to hide anything from anybody. It's just the way it is. I may have looked taller in that picture, I'm sorry. But we're excited. We really think that the Lord is going to use Crossroads Christian Church in a great, marvelous way to reach people for Christ. And we're trying to build a church for those that aren't in a church. And so we're going to try and do some things that will reach out to you and to your friends, and we want your input. We want to know how we can do that the very best. And it's great to have support of some from other churches that have come today. So again, in our very first service, we're trying to make it very clear what we're trying to do. And again, one of the things that we were even trying to help people understand is that, if you come with some other expectations, that's who we are. And again, we fleshed that out a lot more as we went along. But I remember hearing at that How to Plant a Church seminar that if you're going to reach the shakers and movers, they have to sense direction and purpose in your church. And again, you get those people on board. You get buy-in from them. And they're going to help you move this ball down the field. I mean, it's a critical component. And so, again, that sense of where are we heading, that sense of vision is such an important thing. And part of effective leadership is the right people buying into vision. There are those who can partner with you and make it happen. I heard something the other day that we're comprised, 30% of us are pioneers, and 70% of us are settlers. But about 90% of leaders are pioneers. And so part of what we have to do is we got to get those pioneers around us to help with the vision, and then we need some settlers to kind of keep the territory we've taken. We can't just keep moving west if somebody's not kind of claiming the ground behind us. And so you need both, but you need some of those visionaries early on. And I was very fortunate because of vision. God brought some great partners in ministry that allowed us to collaborate around a vision and to deepen it as time went on. Jim Collins in his book Good to Great talks about getting the right people on the bus and then getting the people in the right seats on the bus. And it's so critical, and I think vision helps to do that. And I want to point out, too, that Jesus never called anyone to a tame life. He called them to do something bold and courageous. And again, I think vision, well thought out, is bold and courageous. There's a military saying that says that generals who lead from the rear should have to take it in the rear. It's not about standing back. It's about leaning in. It's about living deeply into that vision. James Kouzes, in his book Leadership Challenge, says, only those leaders who act boldly in times of crisis and change are willingly followed. Let me say that again. Only those leaders who act boldly in times of crisis and change are willingly followed. Look at what it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 and 17. See, Apostle Paul speaking, and he says, therefore I urge you to imitate me. For this reason I have sent to you Timothy, my son, whom I love, who is faithful in the Lord. He will remind you of my way of life in Christ Jesus, which agrees with what I teach everywhere in every church. It's so critical that not only do we cast a vision, but that we live that vision deeply. And I want to give you two examples of leadership. We're gonna show a couple more videos here, and you kind of look at these and tell me which one you think people want to follow, and maybe which one is more reflective of where church leadership can be sometimes today. So let's show the first one from Braveheart. Which is more representative, of who we want to follow, and yet, Fred couldn't get his sweater zipped up. I don't know if you noticed that. I was feeling sorry for him. Good man. But again, I worry that in our desire to even be godly sometimes, we give this very meek and mild leadership message. I could watch Braveheart every week. I am ready to go into battle. Especially, you read that, that's based on a true story. And that statement where he makes, as you think about one day you're going to be lying in your beds and you're going to think back to this moment and you get a chance to take a stand. And you did. They were fighting for Scotland's freedom. And you and I are fighting for the freedom of men's and women's souls. And I would say we need William Wallace's and Wilma Wallace's, that are leading God's church. And if we can't get excited about a vision, how in the world can we expect our people to? I mean, I think we get what we ask for many times. And so, to me, it's just a great image to think about. And I would say this, too. If you're going to reach men today, you're not going to reach them with Fred Rogers at the helm. You need William Wallace. And again, that's not being sexist. That's just a reality. There is a warrior in every man that needs to be called. So, Henry Ford once said that to ask who should be the leader is like asking who should sing tenor in the quartet. The tenor should sing tenor, of course, and the person who is gifted to lead should lead. And I think it goes on to say average leaders spend too much time speculating about people's reactions. What will they say? Who will be offended? How many people will leave? And superior leaders are primarily concerned with what God has instructed us to do in His Word. Amen. We live in an age today where we have created consumers, and we allow them to consume and we cater to them. I'm in a church culture that we've done some of that. And the fact of the matter is, we need to move people beyond that. We need to attract them to us, but then we need to introduce them to Jesus and disciple them to Him, and call them to a high calling. And we need to be holding them back rather than pushing them forward as they understand. We started this church for people that weren't going to church or had toxic faith relationships. And there's so much of that out there. And we had to ask a couple things. One of the things I realized is, I was not Rick Warren. I don't wear, flowery shirts and no socks. And I'm certainly not Bill Hybels. I mean, every illustration was about being out on a boat on the ocean somewhere, with some very rich people. And that wasn't what I had. And so I had to figure out, how do I translate that to Lexington, Kentucky with Glen Schneiders? And this was driven home to me a long time ago. I was at a chapel in seminary, and a guy named Wayne Smith came and spoke. And Wayne, they used to call the Bob Hope of the Restoration movement. I mean, he just was a funny guy, great heart, but tell one joke after another. So I'm taking notes. I'm going to speak that weekend down in Rising Sun. This is going to be great. I get up there and I bombed because I am not Wayne Smith. And so that was a very important thing for me to realize. We have to learn from other people, but we have to figure out what of that works in the context of where we are, and then what of that works with us, and then what of that seems to kind of go along with what we sense God is saying to us. And I would ask you the question: Are vision casters made, or are they born? I think they're both. I think there are some people that are very natural at that, but I think God will do that in us too. I think He'll help to clarify that. And the bottom line is, if you don't give direction as a preacher or church leader, you are left to every whim and desire of anyone with a plan and a bit of energy. How do you know what to say yes to and what to stop doing? Because someone will be glad to give a vision if you don't have clarity around it. All of us get approached by some well-intentioned person that says, let me tell you what we ought to do. And if you don't have a vision to lay that beside, well, it's just your opinion against theirs. Now again, you may be in a leadership role, but still, the easiest way to do that is to lay it beside your vision. And be able to say, okay, does it work with that or does it not? Abraham Lincoln said, determine that the thing can and shall be done, and then we shall find the way. And again, we have to determine what is the thing that needs to be done. And if vision casting doesn't come naturally, then learn from people in churches that do it well. Again, I go back to as a young man learning ministry, and Bob Russell taught me a lot about communication and about application and even about humor. Bob's style of humor and mine are very similar. And he's a lot greater communicator than I am, but I learned from him. But then as I tried to figure out, how do I communicate this message to unchurched people? Bill Hybels being able to listen to him, and just think in the context of what's it like to speak to an audience where you're assuming a lot of people are not Christian that are there, versus the assumption that we often make that everybody in the room is a card-carrying member. And more recently, I've been sitting at the feet of guys like Mike Breen with 3DM Learning Community, and Alan Hirsch, who's written The Forgotten Way, and trying to figure out where is the church heading today in this attractional versus missional model. And what I want to emphasize is I'm still figuring it out in today's world. What worked in 1987 will not work today. Now, that doesn't mean the vision has changed. It means the methodology has changed or is changing. See, the preacher must be the lead learner and to discern what is helpful and what is not. Now, I will tell you, there's a young man I know of, not too far from me, and about every 3 months he's got a new latest, greatest idea. And he has grown that church from 1,000 to less than 500. Now, sometimes you have to do that to clarify vision, but, I mean, it's just, they don't know what they're showing up for. And it is killing a good church. And so we have to, again, we have to understand who we are. We have to understand our community. We have to look at our vision once we have determined that. And then we have to really say, okay, how does this work? Let me just give you an example. Right now, a couple books that I just read. The book Next Christians by Gabe Lyons. I mean, if you're going to reach 20-somethings, 30-somethings, you've got to read Next Christians. Because he has done the research, and he's talking about a lot of wonderful people that say, you know, I am a Christ follower, but don't connect me to the church. I'm really discouraged by what I see going on in the name of God. Now, again, that's not your church, that's not my church, but that's a reality for a lot of people. And we can be mad about that or frustrated about it. We've got to acknowledge that. I mean, some deeply committed Christ followers that have seen the same sort of things you and I have in extreme settings, and they just say, I don't want to be connected with that. And I don't know about you, but I kind of cringe when I'm on an airplane and someone says, what do you do? Because less and less do I find people saying, well, that's great. You know, there's this kind of pregnant pause. They pull away a little bit, you know, and then they try to think of some spiritual connection. I'm just seeing that more and more. And so that's a book that's been helpful to me. Another book, Necessary Endings by Henry Cloud, which talks about the fact that there's a life and a death. There's a cycle, and that we shouldn't be afraid of endings. We need to celebrate them. We need to move on. We need to even encourage them. And it talks about, it's a business book, but it's a counseling book. It's an excellent book for somebody that's dealing with a struggle in relationships or a struggle with addiction. And so again, it's a business book for me. For me, I always want to, again, Cloud is a Christian, but I love to read books from the marketplace to understand and be able to reference as well. And then the book Prodigal God by Tim Keller. So, you know, I've got a business book, I've got a personal growth spiritual book, and a book that's talking about culture, 3 books that I've just read. And Tim Keller looks at the story of Luke 15, but he looks at it from the elder brother perspective primarily. And says, you know, we get enamored with the younger brother, and it's a great message, but the fact of the matter is it really was delivered more for the older brothers, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law that were there hearing this thing. And the elder brother is the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. So again, and the reason I say that is we've got to be reading. And what I've then done is in our most recent staff retreat, we talked. We unpacked Next Christians together. I shared some of that with our congregation in a message just recently, and then we talked about some missional stuff, and then we followed it up by Necessary Endings. And again, it was all about continuing to clarify how do we continue to reach people, provide new direction for people that are searching in today's context in 2011 in Lexington, Kentucky. I remember years ago, Vance Havner had a young man come to him and say, I want to be original or nothing. And Vance said, you're both. You're accomplishing it. And we need, there's about, I think I read today, that about 2% of us that are really innovative creative. I'm not one of them. But I am an early adopter. I think God has given me some clarity around where I sense things are going, and it's allowed me to continue to hone vision. And so right now, I just came from a gathering called Future Travelers, which is 10 pastors together talking about how do we remain attractional but also missional in today's culture in large churches. Trying to clarify vision for us in today's setting. And vision casting cannot be delegated. That's the thing. I think the title of this session is really important because as a primary communicator, you have to be a primary visionary. And Alan Hirsch in his book, The Forgotten Ways, Reactivating the Missional Church, says the pattern of a movement is usually set in a definitive sense by its founder. Therefore, in terms of the movement dynamics and mission of the Christian church, this notion of modeling the message is absolutely crucial to the transmission of the original message beyond our founder to the subsequent generations. We have to model the vision. We can't just parrot it. We have to live it. I'll give you an example for me. If Crossroads is all about reaching people that are far from God, and I don't have any friends that are far from God, tell me how that works. You all need to go do that. You all need to live into this vision. I have to be able to model that, and people have to see that. And the vision casting can't be delegated, but the preacher is the primary vision communicator. And some of us are naturally gifted at that, but that is not an excuse for those of us that are not. We have to assemble a team. Every one of us have in our churches some forward thinkers. And actually, I think forward thinkers get kind of pushed down in a lot of churches because they can tend to raise a ruckus a little bit. And you have to figure out who are the malcontents and who are these visionary types. But we need to encourage that. We need to, you need to have a coffee with the people that have that kind of sense. And let them just breathe into you and talk with you and share with you. You need elders that have a visionary sense. You need to attend seminars and read books. I just had our elders and our staff a year ago read the book Missional Renaissance by Reggie McNeil, just to help us be thinking about what do we think about this? How does this apply to us? And so, having those learnings. I remember when we got involved with Willow Creek. I talked to Lee Strobel, who I got to know at Willow Creek, and I said, Lee, we got a problem. We're trying to do some of these things we've heard from you, but how do we, where do we go with questions? We call up Willow and nobody can talk to us. And so Lee said to me, well, let me tell you what we're thinking about doing. We're thinking about doing this thing called an association, where there'll be an association of churches and you'll get some insight into what's going on. We'll have a seminar every year around that. I said, Lee, you let me know when you start it. We're going to be a part of it. We're church number 25 in the Willow Creek Association. I attended the first leadership summit. Wasn't called that. It was called with 100 people in California. Because again, I saw the need for that to help us clarify who we were in the context of today's culture. And so again, figuring out where those places are for you. It doesn't have to be a Willow Creek or anything like that. It wouldn't be today, most likely. But where is it that you can go to be challenged and encouraged and live into your vision? Helen Keller said the most pathetic person in the world is someone who has sight but has no vision. She ought to know. But the fact of the matter is, you've got to start by really asking God to make that clear to you and spending some time around that. One of the things I didn't say, and I'll mention a little bit more, but is the fact that early on, for me, the beauty of starting a new church is you don't have a church yet. And so you got a lot of time. You got a lot of things to do, but there's a lot of time for you to really sit and reflect and say, okay, God, speak into me. God, help me to do that. I want to share something with you. This is, I got this from Mike Breen at 3DM, and it just really challenged me. This is what they call the half circle, okay, which kind of makes sense. And over here, this is based on John 15. If we abide in Him, we're going to bear much fruit. over here is abide. And he talks about the pendulum, and how a pendulum swings, and it swings based on energy. And here's what he said before he said that. He said, I want you to think about creation. And I want you to think about what happened on day 6. What happened on day 6? Man's created, right? We're created. What happens on day 7? We rest. He says, do you realize that it's out of our rest we then work? Versus the other way around. We work and then we got to rest. It's a significant thing. He said, if you think about a pendulum, and it's over here in fruitfulness, how do you become more fruitful? You can't push it up farther. It's got to go this way. It's got to go into abiding. And if the pendulum doesn't swing here to abiding, we can't swing back with more fruitfulness. And he also said that it's in your abiding that revelation happens. And I don't know where you are with that, and I'm not trying to make that beyond where you want to take it. But here's the thing I've found. When I'm able to have a break, and I'm rested, that's when clarity comes. It sure isn't when I'm tired and I am trying to push the pendulum on up toward more fruitfulness. And for us, again, the way that works is everyone on our staff has 2 days off together. Because we know if they only have a day off, there's no way in the world there can be much rest in that day. There's all that stuff they got to do to get done and be with their families or whatever. And so we have determined we're going to give everybody a weekend just like our people have. And when we do a staff retreat, this is the really cool thing. I didn't see this, but it so confirms it. About 5 years ago, we hired Ruth Haley Barton to come and coach our staff in formation for 2 years. She wrote the book An Ordinary Day with Jesus with John Ortberg. Because we said, our staff can't grow into formation stuff if they don't have some help in that. And so the way we start our staff retreat, if you've been with us, on Monday we had staff retreat. The first thing we did, first of all, we got down there, had a good night's sleep. And then on the Monday morning, for the first half of the day, it was spent in solitude and silence. Followed by play. And then the next day we planned. So we rested and were refreshed, and then we moved into planning. And that's just a very, if you're struggling to get that sense of vision and direction, I would really challenge you to do that. To really think in terms of when is my abiding time? So that God can, and those early days allowed me the time to be able to do that and have a clarity around vision. So, makes sense? Does it make sense to you all? I mean, again, that was Mike Breen. You can read more about it in Building a Discipling Culture. Building Discipling Cultures, rather. Plural. Building Discipling Cultures, Mike Breen. And I want to give him credit for that. Because if he knew I said that and didn't, I'd be in trouble. Okay, so here's the thing I want you to do. And you all are going to have a break in just a couple minutes. But is really, what is God calling your church to be? That in my sense is your assignment. Whether that's today or sometime down the road. But what is God calling your church to be? And why is vision so important? Because without clear vision, it's hard to know what to say yes to and what to say no to. When I was at that How to Plant a Church seminar, they said, don't be surprised if the first people to greet you are the first people to leave you. And I said, they don't know how winsome I am. That's just not going to be the case. And it was absolutely the case. Matter of fact, we had 3 trustees when we started Crossroads. And I was one, and there were 2 others. One was actually the president of the men's fellowship that started the church. Another was an influential leader in the church. He was a dentist. They were the 2 top givers. And inside the first year, they left the church over vision issues. The one guy wanted a Sunday night service so that other churches could come and visit. Meanwhile, in Lexington, 24 years ago, they were still Sunday night service. Everybody said, get me out of Sunday night service. And if you're reaching new people that are just beginning the faith, are they going to come Sunday morning and Sunday? It made no sense. But had I caved to that, I guarantee you today, I would not still be there. because that was a vision issue. And that's what I did. I talked to him and I said, okay, let's just think about what we're doing here. Let's think about vision. Is it, if we're reaching new people, is it more important for us to have a Sunday night service or maybe something even in midweek to kind of get them back to re-energize or to get them into a small group? Do we really think the second most important thing is Sunday night? I had done an exercise with our leadership team at the time, a vision team, and I did a little thing where you write on a piece of paper the word judgment. I said, okay, now put it on your seat and everybody sit out. We're going to just vision cast. And I remember in that meeting, we were vision casting, and some young guy that we had reached through phone call, I said, you know what I want to do? He said, I want to have a dance in the church one day. And this other guy jumps out of his seat, off his judgment, and said, that'll never happen as long as I'm here. Well, we've had a dance and he's not there. So, and the fact of the matter is, there are times where that has to happen in order for the vision to go forward. But here's the thing, we cave. These are the two top givers. And we cave, to issues that are secondary, in my opinion, as tough as that can be, instead of holding strong to the vision. So that's where we're going to stop right now and take a break, and then we'll come back. Well, let's move on. Again, I want to make sure we get through some things that are important for us. But I like this quote by David Gergen. He says, a leader's role is to raise people's aspirations for what they can become and to release their energies so they will try to get there. And again, one of the things I've seen in around vision and leadership is we want to micromanage. We instead of being this place where we release people to do ministry, we control people many times. And what I've seen is, particularly if I were to categorize one of the issues in churches where they struggle around leadership and vision, you have some small-minded leaders that are scared to death that if they release something, it'll go awry. And it will at times. But we've got to try, there's got to be a greater level of trust. We've got to disciple these people and bring them around us, but we can't micromanage this thing. Home Depot says, you can do it, we can help. And that needs to be the attitude of the church. Great idea, that's consistent with our vision. How can we help? Now, that doesn't mean we're going to resource it. It doesn't mean we're going to throw staff to it. But instead of pouring the cold water and pushing it down, what happens? I read just something today in Dave Ferguson's book, On the Verge. He said, say yes, but without funds or staff. If you really want to watch your church begin to get creative around some of this. And I know that gets a bit scary. But I think that good leaders figure that, again, that risk is, how do I walk this line? I've always said, there's a fine line between faith and foolishness. And I want to be right on the razor edge. And we've got to have some discernment around this, but we've also got to release our people. I mean, because this idea of releasing their energies so they'll try to do it. Again, I think part of the problem in our churches many times is it all falls on us because we just micromanage it to death. And vision is not a popularity contest. It does not cave to opposition. Again, early on in that new church, I can remember one of our elders said this. He took me to see a family, friends of his. He said, I couldn't believe what you did. We sat in their living room, and you basically told them why you didn't think they should be a part of the church. And I did, because they were Christians. And they were a little bit older, and based on who we were reaching, I just felt a lot of times they were kind of set in their ways. And here's the thing: that lady to this day is a volunteer in our administrative area. They loved it, but the guy that sat with me is our executive pastor. He said, I was so drawn by the fact that you weren't trying to convince them. You were actually just being very clear on who you were, and then actually kind of talking them out of it rather than trying to draw them in. And I think there is some of that sense. One of the things I do in our new members classes or when we're with new people, we'll say, let me tell you who we are. And if that's not who you are, then let us help you find the place to go. But this is who we are. And the other thing we do with regularity, it says, let me tell you how we handle conflict around here. In Matthew 18, it says, if I have a problem with you, I go to you. And if that doesn't get resolved, then I bring an elder or leader alongside. So I said, don't ever come to me to talk about somebody else, because I'm going to march you across the room to them. If you don't want to talk to them, don't talk to me about them. I've also always said to our leaders, I'm going to defend you in public, and I'm going to challenge you in private. An interesting thing, really, in the 37 years of ministry, my elders, I am an elder at Crossroads, my elders and staff have always been some of my dearest friends. Because we really are around the vision together. And we're figuring this thing out together. And so we don't talk about each other, we talk to each other. We practice Matthew 18. And vision is not a popularity contest. It does not cave to opposition. Vision clarifies where resources are distributed. And for us, it has always been about how does this help new people. We do not have charter members at Crossroads. And that was very intentional, because we didn't want anybody to say, well, let me tell you, I've been here for a really long time, so I've got more power than you. Our question has always been, whether it's a new building or staffing or whatever it might be, our program, how does this affect new people? And when you ask that, it prevents you from just really getting it all about us. I want to show a video here, because I was talking at the break about how we have to live into this vision and this idea of building relationships with people that are far from God. And so this is out of a message that I shared back, I think, in July. Called to be in the world, but not of the world. And I think too many Christians have just pulled completely out of the world. And we have to figure out where to draw the lines. And some of us, what we really want is somebody like me giving us exactly what you can do and what you can't do. And that's the real growth, is figuring that out for yourselves. And I find lots of bunkered in, hunkered down Christians love to make disparaging remarks about those who are determined to live in this world as salt and as light. Some of you know I love to play golf. And I played it, for most of my adult life. And I've played in a men's league for at least the last 12 years. With a group of guys that is a place where I get to be some of the God flavoring along with others, and bringing some of the God colors into that environment. And it is a time for me. I played Tuesday night, and I was just with some of the guys afterwards, and I'm just convinced that time in that clubhouse is as important as anything I do. And as long as we make the playoffs, I'm fine with that. But I want you to hear me. Especially if you're one of those league guys, because a number of guys that play in that league now come here to church. You are not a project to me. You're a friend. You are someone that I value, and someone who I just want to do life with. And I'm grateful that those guys will include me into that place. See, too many well-intentioned Christians have deserted the world for sterile, safe church buildings. So again, for me, it's very important that's a very real thing. We have a church league, and I've never played in it. And people come and say, tell me about the golf league. And I said, well, I really don't know about it. I hear it's a good thing, but this is where I play. And I can remember there was a guy named Tucker. And we were playing one night in league, and he said to me, and Tucker, he probably, I don't know how many drinks he'd had at this point, but he said to me one time, I drink a little too much. I said, yeah, Tucker, I know that. We need to work on that. But Tucker said to me, he said, let me tell you why I don't go to church. He said, my mother and I as a little kid, we were in a church, and it was a church where they voted on membership. And the family that they were voting on was of a different color. And the church voted them down for membership. And he said, my mother stood up and said, this is the last time I'll be in this blankety-blank church. And I said to Tucker, I said, it would have been my last time too. The very next Sunday, I speak. And you could have knocked me over with a feather when I went down after speaking, and up comes Tucker. He now works in our nursery. We don't know who's controlling who when he's back there. But, that's what it's about for me. And one of the neatest guys, loves his kids. But that was a pivotal moment. And so, being able to just live into that vision is such an important thing. Vision clarifies where resources are withheld, too. The fact of the matter is, Henry Cloud says this in the book, Necessary Endings. The pruning moment is that clarity of enlightenment when we become responsible for making the decision to either own the vision or not. If we own it, we have to prune. If we don't, we have decided to own the other vision. The one called average. And again, guys and gals, if vision helps us to be able to say, no, we can't do that. Or in order to do this, we're going to have to cut some other stuff away. Collins talks about our to-do list and our not to-do list. And if you're going to add something to the to-do list, what has to come off? Or what are we going to no longer resource? Because dollars must flow to vision. And vision determines hires. Vision determines what next buildings or not buildings. We built multi-purpose. We always have. And I can remember when we built our most recent worship facility. It has 2 gym floors in it. We have to put down 1,000 to 1,200 chairs every weekend. Guess who didn't like that? The guys who put up chairs. And I said, we're not going to spend more money to have fixed seating. Think about how we can use this facility 24/7. It was about vision. And knowing that that facility can be used as much to reach people in the things that are done besides the weekend service. Matter of fact, I want you to see, here's a video from when we, our 15th anniversary, I'm talking a little bit, I mentioned a lady named Jody Rose who came to faith very early, but I want you to hear what our architect picked up about buildings for us.
And you may not have been around in those first days, but you need to realize that Crossroads has never been about buildings. That's why Shoney's Inn or the Lakeview building that we talk about are just vehicles to be used by God. Well, an architect, as we were designing this building, said, it's really interesting. Buildings aren't that important to you. They're just tools to accomplish God's Word. And I thought, boy, for someone to catch that was so true. See, this is a celebration of what happens when we lead people in a new direction toward a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. People like Jody Rose that you heard from. Some of you have seen Jody dance, do drama, and you maybe know Jody, and you just think she's been a Christ follower all of her life. But she showed up the second week with her husband. And when she was baptized with her daughter Sagan. She kind of got a 2-for-1 deal, And now her daughter Sagan and her dance together, and we watched her grow. And it is fair to say that her life and that of her family has been changed forever. And there are many Jodys whose lives have been changed by God at Crossroads. As Thelma Wallace mentioned, 6 months into the life of Crossroads, we merged with a group called the Lakeview Christian Church, taking possession of their metal building at 3712 Arbor Court, which is kind of at the corner of Trent Boulevard and Man of War. And Thelma has told me on more than one occasion that God had them build that building so that we could join them and use it to reach many searching people. Now think about this. Those mature people handed over the keys, their financial resources, all rights and decisions. It is the most wonderful display of maturity that I think I've ever seen in the church. And we went from rented facilities 1 day a week to a permanent facility 7 days a week. And we grew in that metal building to 4 services. And life after life was being changed. People were coming and bringing their friends. Many seeking people were finding answers to their spiritual questions. And the story doesn't end there. We purchased 11.4 acres at 4190 Todd's Road. And in order to build some momentum, and to remind us that we had grown into a larger church, because this metal building would only hold about 150 per service. So everybody's thinking, well, we're just this nice little church, but we're really upwards of 500 people. We said, let's get them all together. And so what we determined to do, we chose that instead of having 3 services in a room that would hold 150, we would have a service under a big tent on the property.
And again, that was about just casting vision for where we need to go. And again, we never built to make it nicer for us. We built because we needed to create space for our friends to be able to come and learn about God. You know, this metal building that we mentioned. Sorry. It's okay. And that really is a good picture of me. That metal building that we were in. Here, I want to tell you how this went down, because it's about vision. We get a phone call from this group called the Lakeview Church, and they said, our preacher has resigned. We've got this metal building. It's 9,000 square feet on 3 acres. The land's paid for. The equity position is about $135,000, plus they had $20,000 in the bank. And so they said, we'd like to talk to you about merger. So I pulled together our leadership team. I said, okay, we're going to go over talking about merger. What needs to happen? I said, okay, number one, it's no longer Lakeview. It's got to be Crossroads, because it's a new deal. Their leaders have to resign because there can't be 2 directions. They need to give us the keys, and we have no control over what happens inside the building. That is not a merger. That's a takeover, right? and we knew it wouldn't happen. But we also knew there could not be 2 directions. There can't be 2 factions fighting for how we're going to be. So that night, we made that presentation, and they said, well, our elders have decided to resign. Again, we didn't know they had $20,000 in the bank. They said, we got $20,000 in the bank. Our only question is it okay if we come back? That's really the way it went down. I'm not kidding you. And we said, oh, one other thing, we don't want you joining as a block. There is no more Lakeview. We're just Crossroads together. The really cool thing is our treasurer, until she struggled with Alzheimer's, was from that group. The electrician and the roofing company, both those companies that did our subsequent buildings, were from that group of people. And it really was one of the most mature, just God-ordained things I've ever seen. But again, had we not clarified vision, it would have been so easy to just, we're 1 day a week in Shoney's, it would have been so easy just to ignore those things. But we had to align around vision to make it happen. Let me talk about some application. I want you to see that true vision comes from God. Again, I'm sharing some things, but I sensed that God was saying something in me. And the really cool thing is I sensed that, and then I begin to go some places, and God is breathing that into me. Again, there was not a seeker model at that point. There was, that I was aware of. The saddleback idea of going out and asking 5 questions, the key questions, it was not there until we jumped into it. And it was just this sense in me that God was wanting to use new churches to really reach new people, and that we've got to first and foremost ask that question of what's going to make them feel comfortable. And again, a lot of what we do today, 24 years ago, was really almost off the chart. And I remember reading a scripture that just really hung with me. It's Ephesians 3:20 and 21. And I began to pray that. I began to pray, now God, I want you to do more, immeasurably more than we can even ask or imagine. I don't know what that means, but I don't want us to be limited by what we think can happen. And I want you to show your power at work within us. And so we make these 11,000 phone calls to people within a 5-mile radius of where the church is going to begin. And we would call them, we'd say, hi, I'm Glen Schneiders with the new Crossroads Church starting in your area. Could I ask you a couple quick questions? And the first question was, are you active in a local church? And if they said yes, we said, hey, that's great. We're not looking for people. We're looking for people who don't have a church home. Now, sometimes people say, well, I haven't been to that church in years, and they would want to engage us. Sometimes they would get kind of profane. Now, those are the ones we'd call back because we knew we really wanted them. But it was amazing how God just brought people together. So we gather And about 4 weeks in, an older lady that was kind of outside our demographic, but that was not going to church anywhere, we had a phone call, driving an old Crown Victoria, comes up to me after the services and hands me a check. It's folded in half. And she said, I just believe in what you're doing. Now I need to say, we had spent $5,000 to do the telemarketing and the mailers, and we didn't have that money. I just said to our people, God, I just think God's in this, and if He is, He's going to show up. He's going to do more than we can ask or imagine. So we just took that $5,000, borrowed it, and just risked it. And so she hands me this check, and in that day we didn't have a treasurer at that point, and so stuff would kind of go through me sometimes. And so I waited until she left. And I'm thinking, she's obviously on fixed income. If this is $100, it's a huge deal from her that she would do this. It was a check for $20,000. Somebody with phone call. If you don't think that didn't just invigorate our people to say, let's take the next hill. Remember a lady named Catherine that we called it? She was one of the fun ones because she actually wanted to talk. She would call us back and say, are you guys still going to meet? And so she shows up with her husband David and their son. Now here's the cool thing. I could just tell immediately that David was not nearly as comfortable in church settings as she was. And so I began to get around David and talk to him. And so one day, several weeks in, I said, David, if you don't mind me asking, what do you do? He said, well, I'm glad you asked. He said, I'm the general manager of WDKY television station here in Lexington. And I just really love what you're doing here, and I've been thinking about it. I'd like to offer you a studio and a producer, and we will produce commercials for you to run at Christmas time for free, if that'd be okay. No, we'd be really ticked, David. There's no way we could do that. And again, this was, as it turned out, a guy who came to faith at Crossroads. Still in that searching mode that God uses to provide advertising for us that we could have never afforded because of a vision that was being lived out that He could identify with. And we have just seen that over and over and over again. And I think it's again so much to do with vision. And again, I want you to think about, as you're thinking about this, what has God uniquely designed you to be? It's not Crossroads, unless it is Crossroads. But for the rest of us, it's not. And so what has He uniquely designed you to be? What is your calling as a church? What is the needs? What are the needs within your local community that God may be laying on your heart to follow through on and to fulfill? It's not about what's the latest, greatest methodology. It's what has God uniquely designed you to be and do. I like what it says, what Mordecai said to Esther, that God had appointed her for such a time as this. And it really, I think, is that abiding time where we get away and say, okay, God, what is it? Maybe it's the vision that you have and it just needs to be tweaked. Maybe though it's a redirect and there's some real time to have to think that through. But what has God appointed you to do? And trusting Him and His ability to work through you. I'm always comforted by the fact that God spoke through a donkey one time and He can do it again. Balaam's ass, He used. And the fact of the matter is, my wife reminds me of that regularly at times. But the fact of the matter is, it was so important for me to understand that I am uniquely designed by God to be Glen Schneiders. And that Crossroads has a very special place in His kingdom. And that's all we're called to be. And if we do that and do that well, it's going to be God-honoring and we're going to be blessed. I think it was Rick Warren, I don't know if it's original with him, but he says vision leaks. And the fact of the matter, it does. And that's why it was fun for me even looking back at different things, just seeing how that relating to vision to our people is just a regular part of what we do. And you ought to preach a vision series at least once a year, but you ought to tell vision stories regularly in your teaching. And I think there are a couple of key vision questions that we ask. One is, how does this decision affect new people? Again, I watch this sometimes around our vision and say, you know what? We need to have this new service for new people. And we're going to have it at 8 a.m. on Sunday. Because we couldn't have it at 11 a.m. when everybody wants to come. Okay, there's the problem. If we really get it, how are we going to default to what matters to them the most? You know, figuring out a time that's going to work for them rather than again, somehow thinking we're going to reach them, but we're going to try and get them at a time when they wouldn't come. And again, the more our people begin to really get that, the less of this consumer mentality that is so plagues the church today. So we regularly ask this question, how does this decision affect new people? And again, I just go back to different initiatives, a lot of them around money or energy, and it's always about asking our people and encouraging our people and thanking our people for the fact that they're willing once again to sacrifice for their potential younger brothers and sisters in Christ. You know, I'm always amazed. I'm a grandparent. I've been a grandparent for the last 4 years now, and it is the coolest thing. But in the church, a lot of the spiritual grandparents expect the babies to conform to them instead of the other way around. You know, as a grandparent, I'll read the same book over and again. I'll sing songs, get in uncomfortable positions, make all sorts of sacrifices for those kids. But in the church, it's about rights and privileges. And so the opportunity to forego those for the sake of my grandkids.
Preach it.
You know, in Hebrews 5, where it talks about, you know, the meat of the word versus the milk, and the whole implication is there. You know, all of us that have been in ministry any length of time, somebody comes to us and say, you know, I'm not being fed. And I really want them to look at Hebrews 5 and say, okay, but, you know, do you feed yourself, you know, physically, or do you expect, you know, do I need to come over and cut your food up for you? And, you know, do the airplane thing, get in your mouth. I mean, you know, that whole thing, it's just amazing to me. And even that feeding is the implication is that it's then to be used for the edification of the body of Christ. And I am convinced that we don't need to feed people more, we need to get them exercising. We need to get them using their faith. You know, if you get somebody discipling someone else, somebody walking alongside a new Christian or someone that's early in their faith journey, they're not going to have those issues. Because they're beginning to answer questions for themselves. They're beginning to really get it. So we ask this question, how does this decision affect new people? And this other question, I think we first had this asked by an external focus emphasis that we did. If your church ceased to exist, would anyone in your community care or notice? I'm not talking about the church community. I'm talking about the community in which your church resides. Or would it just not even be a blip on the radar? That's been a huge thing for us in recent years. Of saying, how are we impacting the community around us? You know, and again, that external focus. Our hope is someday that our multi-purpose facility is renamed. The Andover Community Center, where Crossroads Christian Church meets. Because the facility is actually used more for the community than it is for us. That in our minds is truly being the church. It's that meshing of the community and the church together. I mean, that's our, and that, again, it goes back to, I'm so glad we held the line on this multi-purpose nature, because it gives us that ability. There's a little community that's 2 miles from us that we are investing huge energy and resource into to be the church in that community and to do things like after-school programs and mentoring programs, and both with the kids and with their parents, to really invest in them and to have them involved in our athletic leagues with our kids. And as there's a kind of a big brother, big sister relationship to those kids becoming very comfortable with us and becoming comfortable with Crossroads. You know, Bill Hybels said, good enough is not good enough when it comes to honoring God through the church. In response to His holiness and greatness, in gratitude for His monumental sacrifice for us, our attitude ought to be to pay tribute to Him with the best we can offer. And I'm not talking about obsessive perfectionism, but rather an attitude of excellence that permeates all we do in the church and our personal lives. After all, what we do as Christians reflects on the Christ we serve. And I think clarified vision allows us to ask the right questions, to get the right results, that allows us to do the most important things. Not just be busy. It's not hard to be busy in the church, is it? But to be busy around the right things. You know, a clear vision unites the right people and it runs off the wrong ones. That's very important. You need to hear that. Clear vision unites the right people and it runs off the wrong ones. We have not had a major division in 24 years at Crossroads because we ask the question, how is this going to affect the new person coming in? Not what are the rights and privileges of those that have been here the longest. And I really do think, I mean, the other thing is, because of that Matthew 18 principle, we don't have a lot of people pulling people aside and factions being created. I don't have a lot of people coming to me because they know that's how we're going to deal with it. And so there's either healthy resolve or people just realize they're not going to have a way in this community. And as a result, I just go back to some of those very earliest days and how critical it was that we held it. And I go back even farther. When I was in Indiana, and I was 20 years of age when I went to Rising Sun, and I began to preach there. I went there one weekend to fill in. I filled in for 13 years. And we grew. We were in a 150-year-old building with stained glass windows, a beautiful old building, and we were out of space. And so we just had to move. And in a lot of smaller churches, there's a power broker, and the power broker was Harold Clifton. And I can remember I said we got to do something. And Harold said, I can tell you right there, that's where my mother sat, that's where her grandmother sat. They were baptized in this church, we were married in this church, they were buried in this church. It ain't happening. That stained glass windows, I mean, we can't do that. And Harold was an elder. And I grew up to Jack's, which is a local restaurant. I had coffee with the boys about every morning. Again, that was kind of a place for me to interact with people. And I just kept spending time with Harold. And then talking to Harold about this. And one day Harold came down to my office. He said, you know what I've realized? He said, 20 years ago, I was a young deacon at the church, and we were going to build that Sunday school wing that's on the back of this building. And there was an old elder named James Dedman. And he was opposed to it. He said, there's no way we can do that. He said, we'll not be able to pay for it. He said, we got James out of the way, and in 20 months we had the thing paid for. And here's what I've realized. I have become James Dedman. I'm in. He actually became our representative on the whole building project. He had a construction background and saw the thing through from beginning to end. But again, I just got up beside him. I spent time with him. I loved him. And God did a work. Now again, there are some times you get up against someone and it's his way or your way or whatever, but there are other people that we just need to continue to build that relationship in, and that's where discernment and sensing from God becomes a very, very important part of that. We actually took a couple of stained glass windows from that old building and brought them into the new building. It was a great way to kind of understand some needs for those people, but also to move forward. And literally was the biggest thing that happened in Rising Sun in 50 years. And that church is the focal point spiritually in that community today. I got a chance to go back there just a few months ago at a dedication of another building, and it's just really cool to see how that vision has continued on. See, as time goes on, vision is clarified with new methods for the same vision. Again, for us, it is still asking the same questions, just figuring out in today's context what that looks like. I'll give you a couple examples of that because it was just helpful for me. I I don't know how many years ago, I read something that said at the time, the number one service that unchurched people were most likely to come to was Christmas Eve. I don't know if it's because of the candles and it's dark or whatever or what, and at the time, this was back in where the kind of Christmas pageant was a big thing, and in Lexington you had a couple churches doing really big pageant stuff, and there's nobody to compete with that. And I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have one of the very best Christmas Eve services in town. And we're gonna, you know, anybody on staff, I'm sorry, but you're with us through Christmas Eve. You know, there's no going home early because this is a critical opportunity for us to reach people. And so we have done that. And here's the other thing that played out. A few years back, we had Christmas Eve services, and then Sunday was Christmas Day, and we didn't have services. And that was consistent with who we are. I'm not saying you should do this, but that was just consistent. We had 3,000 people for Christmas Eve that wanted to be there, could be there with their kids. They got a chance to celebrate, and then we were able to take Christmas Day off. We got that got out, and I got calls from Fox News and other news agencies, and because it was just hard to believe that we were making that choice. We were not making that choice against God. We were making that choice to say, okay, we're gonna meet when we can get the most people there. And we're going to also realize that for our people, when we ask them to do that, sir, we're going to also let them rest and celebrate Christmas with their family and their kids the next day. But we did that Christmas Eve, and again, that's something we continue to this day. Now, what we do is we give our staff off the week after Christmas. And it's a dead time in the church and gives them a chance to really rest and to recuperate. The other thing that I've realized is as a church that we do not do maintenance well. And so multi-site has been an effective way for us to continue to grow and create community. The cool thing about multi-site for us, and we have a second campus in Georgetown, we're adding a third one in Richmond in January of next year, is I say to people, if you want to see us in the early days, go to Georgetown and see the campus there. And it gives people a chance to see the vision afresh. And again, it could be for you a lot of different things. It could be supporting church plants as a way to keep that vision. You know, again, some of us are in areas where there's not going to be a lot of growth. So how do we still promote growth? Well, we have a vision for church planting and for the kingdom in that way. Or we're living in an area that's depressed, and so how can we really be the church in that more inner city or rural area that is depressed economically? How do we care for widows and orphans? And so for us in recent times, besides multi-site, the other thing that's helped us with casting vision is this whole idea of being the church. Because one of the most effective ways today to evangelize people is not to get them in your front door on a weekend, but it's to get them serving alongside you in your community. People are more inclined to do that. And so we have begun to really emphasize that. I gave you all some handouts that just a couple weeks back we did a Be the Church weekend, and this is our program. It's a magnet that we give out that the people just be reminded of, and then it gives you the most recent serving opportunities. But I want to give you a quick video support of this. This will be the last video we look at. That just was that Be the Church weekend, where what we do now is in January we made this, came up with this idea that we want to do this, and once a quarter, we have a Be the Church weekend where we kind of give an update of what's going on. So let's just watch this next video. This morning, to those at our Georgetown and our Andover campuses, we are so glad that you can join us on a weekend where we have a very special emphasis. Back in January, we challenged you to stop going to church, and instead, we challenged you to be the church. Because for too long, the church in America has huddled behind closed doors while real needs that we can respond to go unmet. And those who are investigating faith look at that disconnect to real-world issues, and they find it very inconsistent with the teachings and the life of Jesus Christ. So in order to not lose sight of this commitment, once a quarter, we have been doing a Be the Church weekend. And we're giving you some updates of things that are happening. And it's really neat because some of the things we're just learning of, we have no input or impact on. And I love the fact that it's not about Crossroads. It's about people just simply living out their faith. At our staff retreat this past week, I learned of some empty nesters in Richmond. They're a part of our Richmond campus core team. They're helping with a food pantry because they heard this challenge and they accepted it. You know, we introduced a new word back in January to you. It's the word missional. And the idea of being missional means that the church exists to be missionaries by going into our workplaces and neighborhoods and areas outside our culture and comfort and living sacrificially in those areas for the good of others. See, every Christ follower is called to be a missionary. Mission is about going instead of sitting. And unfortunately, for too long, the church has expected the world to come to us instead of going to them. Jesus, in what has been called the Great Commission, commanded his followers. He didn't suggest. This was a command. Notice what he says. It's Matthew 28, verses 18 through 20, in the Bibles that we give out at both our campuses. He says, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So wherever you go," some translations say, "as you go, make disciples of all nations. Baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Teach them to do everything I have commanded you. And remember that I am always with you until the end of time." Again, the implication is as you go, not if you go. And people have taken up that challenge. We had 5 trips to Joplin this summer to help in relief efforts there. Today, there are people that are a regular part of Church Under the Bridge in Lexington, and they'll be serving that homeless community, that homeless church. And they do that on a regular rotation. They are simply being the church.
Yeah, there's a little more to that, but we actually showed a video of some of our 2 14-year-old girls in Georgetown who, on their own money, their own time, did a backyard VBS for kids in their neighborhood because they wanted them to experience what it's like to be the church and to experience the love of Jesus. So just a couple other thoughts and we'll be done. You know, I love this quote by Christopher Reeve that says, "So many of our dreams seem impossible, then improbable, then inevitable." And you know, some of this, you get up against it and you can think, I don't know. You know, and I realize it's hard. You're going to have some wisdom to know, you know, how quickly you push on some things. But boy, we got to clarify around vision. I was, again, in the book On the Verge, Dave Ferguson, Alan Hirsch mentioned the advice that General Erich Shinesky gave to Donald Rumsfeld. He said, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. And we have to figure out, I'm not going to figure that out for you today. You know, where's the church heading? But we got to figure that out. And you got to figure out where your church is heading. And we have got, Jack Welch said this, change before you have to. And we have to innovate without abandoning. And so I just would encourage you as you're thinking about this, just what has God called you to do? And remember that He is a God that is able to do immeasurably more than all that we can ask or even imagine. And His power is at work within you to do powerful and wonderful things. And my prayer is that the church is released in all its power to make a change in your world and in mine. Thank you very much for letting me share with you today.